We're going to watch this MercyxGenocide video.
Following up on the 2008 original with a more action yet much more intense gameplay style, as well as exploring more of the universe and lore of Dead Space. Fans of the franchise have been eagerly asking, when will we get a Dead Space 2 remake? After the success of the recent Dead Space 1 remake, it seems like the next step. But there are a lot of reasons why this actually might not happen. You see, the team who created the Dead Space remake is actually known as Motive Studio, who is right under the company that we all know as Electronic Arts, also known as EA. Yes, that EA. It just so happens to be the same EA that was also in control of the studio known as Visceral Games, formerly known as EA Redwood Shores, who developed the original Dead Space trilogy. And after all those games...
So I've been playing Dead Space for a long time, and I really liked the remake. I thought the remake was really good. I thought it definitely made improvements onto the first one that were needed, some quality of life stuff. But there's also a question that I feel like a lot of people have, and that's, is there going to be a second one? And there's been lots of talk. There's been lots of talk that no. I've heard a lot of people say no. But let's just see what he has to say. Let's just keep going.
Motive took over the remake, but before Motive Studios was in control of the Dead Space remake, they helped create games such as the Star Wars Battlefront 2 reboot, as well as Star Wars Squadrons. Now, why are these things important? Well, it's because they are much more than just the studio that took over Dead Space. And as of right now, they've got 2 projects under their name. The first being an Iron Man game, and the second being the next Battlefield game, which in itself are 2 major titles that they are currently working on. Now, that doesn't say for itself that any other studio can't take on the Dead Space 2 remake, but considering everything they built upon that game specifically, such as the Alive system, for example, which, if you don't know about it already, it stands for the Adrenaline Limbic System Response Intelligent Dialogue Vitals and Excursion System, and it dictates...
Which is really cool. He's going to say it's one of those systems where the more Isaac's hurt, the dialogue changes to match that, which is really cool. But I don't know. To hear that the company that did the remake of the original Dead Space is doing 2 other games right now, it definitely seems like that's not something they're going to do, at least. At least a Dead Space 2 isn't in their pipeline if they're going to do a Battlefield and an Iron Man game, because those would probably take a while to do. So does it seem like there's going to be a second one? And that's one of those things that, do you trust someone else to take over that? But it's EA who owns Dead Space, one of the worst companies of all time. EA is known for their money grabbing when it comes to their consumers and not really caring. So I don't know. We'll see. We'll see what else he has to say.
How Isaac's cue sounds are in Isaac's breathing patterns, grunts, and other such noises that are coming out of him based on jump scares, adrenaline, heart rate, and current health of the character, leading to a lot of differences between each line he states during gameplay depending on what state you're in. I know, it's a lot. It's very complicated, but that's what makes it so unique and cool.
Yeah, that is cool. I don't know if I've ever played a game that does that.
Who else would take
besides
up the
Dead
role of the
Space?
second remake after the first one was just so well done? And especially since all of those developers that worked on it are now working on board of 2 completely separate projects. As I've mentioned, it's still very likely that the studio could be a part of it, but considering they have already have a lot going for them on the table, it just seems less likely as time goes on. It's more than just Motive Studio, though. You see, the remake didn't do as well as EA initially wanted it to.
Which is stupid. The remake was extremely successful. And it's one of the greatest remakes I think I've ever played. But they consider it a failure because it didn't hit numbers that they wanted. EA is so money hungry that they would keep good games from being made to make some more trash.
That, in part, is due to the low amount of sales that the Dead Space remake produced. While we don't have the full amount of money that they earned shown to the public, it is estimated to have been around $110 million in gross revenue, which isn't bad by any means, but it wasn't what was intended. Also, if they were to go through this once again, going along to the second title, a lot less work would be needed in terms of the engine and title, as we already know that they have all the Dead Space 2-like assets and mechanics built from the remake, because the remake was already utilizing a lot of the features that were first introduced in Dead Space 2.
Yeah, exactly. You've done so much of the work for yourself already in these games with the remake, the first remake. Like, it's so easy to just go and do the second one because a lot of the assets are the same. Like, the necromorphs don't change all that much from the first to the second. They add a couple more in. A lot of the weapons are very similar or the same. So, I don't know. Like, that's just throwing away money at this point. You already put the work in on this game. So why not squeeze the orange for a little more juice, you know?
Such as the gravity, kinesis for taking limbs off necromorphs, and item drops.
And give us what we want.
When Dead Space 2 dropped in 2011, it already looked fantastic. Sure, the graphics are a bit dated now, but the original game still holds up visually in many ways. Remaking it wouldn't just be about updating visuals, but also reworking environments, character models, and the overall design.
Yeah.
That's a lot of work. And
I mean, it is a lot of work, but it's a great game, and if you have the skeleton for it and you can just smooth over the new features from the remake of the last game, I think it would work fine. And it would be worth it. And people would go bananas over Dead Space 2 Remake. I think even more so than the first one. Truly, I think it would sell better. Just,
EA doesn't think that there's a massive demand for Dead Space 2 Remake, they might hesitate to go through the effort of doing so. Regardless, as I've stated before, they've already got a lot of assets and mechanics that can easily be put in the future Dead Space games without changing anything about them. That being said, though, the original Dead Space games didn't actually have a lot of money coming for it either. If you look at the past 3 mainline Dead Space titles before the remake, you can clearly see that the original Dead Space 2 only made around 4 million copies, while the production costs
only 4 million copies. Well, it cost $60K to make, but come on. Those kind of results today still for even big companies, like, let's be real, even some of the larger companies, if you could tell any one of these companies today, because of the way the games market is, that they would get a guaranteed 4 million sales on a game, even if it was a $60 million project, I think a lot of them would still go for that and consider that a success. And the way that they do it could also mean that they would get more sales. But, like, what are these people, what are they on? Seriously. How delusional do you have to be at EA to not see a home run in front of you, even if it's not going to make what you want it to? If it's still successful, do it. Why is this even a question?
of its entirety was about $60 million. Again, it's unknown to know the exact full number of profit that they made, but it is suggested that it didn't perform that well financially, despite how popular it may seem looking back today, which likely leads to the reasoning of why Dead Space 3 turned out the way it is now.
Well, Dead Space 3 was a terrible game. They changed the formula for Dead Space. So you can't just take a survival horror and turn it into an action game. Resident Evil would tell you that's not going to work. So they just tried to spread themselves way too far on an IP and make it something that it wasn't, to the point where nobody new wanted to play it and everybody who was a fan abandoned it. So yeah, of course Dead Space 3 was a flop. They buried that game before it was released.
Or co-op adventure including microtransactions that are the core value of the main campaign. Now, there is just one thing I gotta bring up, and that's the fact that just months ago, Dead Space 2's remake was reportedly shut down and shelved due to the poor amount of sales that the Dead Space remake was putting
What I've
down.
heard.
The gaming insider that claimed this was Jeff Grubb, who is supposedly a very...
EA Motive was working on a Dead Space 2 remake, which is the concept phase, but got canceled, shelved because of lackluster sales in the first one. They are now working on Iron Man and Battlefield. That is what has been said everywhere I've listened for Dead Space news.
reliable leaker when it comes to these sort of things. Thankfully, though, in this case, an EA dev actually shot this claim down by stating that there's no...
This is the big one. A rumor today suggested that EA shelved a Dead Space 2 remake, which an EA spokesperson denied, saying there was no validity to this story. People familiar with the project tell Bloomberg the EA statement is correct. Motive has been on other projects for nearly a year. So Motive's not doing this for sure, because they're doing other stuff. But EA shelved a Dead Space 2 remake, which an EA spokesperson denied, saying there was no validity. That implies that there could still be one. So people are saying that it was shelved. An EA spokesperson said, no, that's not a true statement. So maybe Motive isn't the one working on it. Maybe it's somebody else. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but it's also not a good thing. Because let's look at, just for a second and for references, the Resident Evil remakes that just happened not long ago. Let's see how that played out. Capcom did Resident Evil 2. Major success. Great game. I think they also had a smaller team with them, but it was mostly Capcom who did it. They turned Resident Evil 3 over to another company to do that. It wasn't an in-house company. And Resident Evil 3 was considered kind of a bust. So who had to come back and do Resident Evil 4? Capcom. They had to come back and do it themselves. So that's where it gets scary, because Motive is the one who did the first remake. So if they have somebody else do it, I don't know if that's going to be good or not. But I'd rather a chance than nothing at all. So
no validity
maybe
to this story whatsoever, and that Motive has been on the other projects for nearly a year at this point, making them on track for them sometime after they release the Dead Space remake. That said, none of this technically confirms that there's no remake being in development, although I honestly believe there's nothing in production right now at the moment. It's still very likely that they could make a remake of Dead Space 2 in the future, but it doesn't seem to happen anytime in the near future. So while Dead Space 2 remake would be amazing, there are plenty of hurdles standing in the way. Whether it's timing, resources, or simply EA strategy,
there's a lot of factors. Let's be real. There's tons and tons of things that go into this, but I'm looking for an eventual. I am doing this video today mostly because this is the last day on Steam that Dead Space 2 is only $4. $4. It's normally $20. It's $4 right now. And if you're not a fan or have never played it, you should definitely spend the $4 and get it, because the version on there is cracked. I just booted it up the other day and started playing, because I haven't played Dead Space 2 in literal over a decade. It's been a long time. Actually, I've probably played it a little bit sooner than that, but it's still been almost 10 years. And the version on Steam is the cracked one, so I go in and you can go into the shop and everything is unlocked for you. So it does take a little bit of the game out if you want to buy everything right off the bat, because everything, like every suit, every weapon is in the shop for free. You could just start with anything you want. You could also play the game the way it's meant to, and make it hard. But if you just want to get a good feel for the game, play the story, just really, see what Dead Space 2 is about. Go on Steam and buy it and see why this game needs a remake like the first one did. Because honestly, as great as the first one is, and I love that game, Dead Space 2 came out and I was obsessed with that game. And I just wanted to play it again and again and again, and I did. Back to back to back right when it came out. I love that game. And you should go try it for yourself. And the more people we have on this, the more likely it is we'll get a remake in the future.
A lot of factors that unfortunately make it seem unlikely, at least for now. But on the bright side of things, there's still that possibility of it happening at least sometime in the future. We just don't know when or if it will for sure, regardless of if we will ever see the remake or not. Luckily, the remake of the first game is just perfect to play before the other games if wanting to play for the sake of consistency, as the second and third games still follow the same story beats as both the 2008 and 2023 game without having any major problems in its story. There might still technically be some changes in the remake compared to the original in terms of story, but it doesn't mess up anything in the future, and for the most part, only expands the universe and lore to greater lengths. That being said, do you want to see a Dead Space 2 remake in the distant future?
Yes, we
Comment
do.
down below how you feel about it.
Yes, we absolutely do. And thank you, MercyGenocide. This is a great video. Give him a subscription. Come on, give him a like if you watch this, because this guy, he knows. He's a Dead Space fan just like me, and we need people on this. We need a community to come together on this. I love this game. I love survival horror games in general, but Dead Space 2 has a very special place in my heart. And I think we can get enough people together, we could get EA's attention, and they would eventually push this out, and hopefully in a good state. I don't want them to do it if it's going to be half-assed, if the team who does it doesn't care. We need a good remake on par with the other remake, if not better. Because this game's awesome. This story continues great, and I'd love to see it. And we don't really care about Dead Space 3, but they would need to do an entire overhaul on that game to get that game good again. I think they would have to completely redo it from the ground up if they wanted Dead Space 3. But I think it is a possibility. My hope has been a little bit renewed hearing this, because that it doesn't say that they're. This video was brought to light that EA is not going to do this. They have not definitively said no Dead Space 2 remake. They have simply said Motive is for sure busy with other stuff right now, but they didn't deny it. So there's a chance. And that's more than I had before today, before this video. So thank you, MercyGenocide, for giving all this to us. Yeah, hopefully at some point in the near future, I can be playing Dead Space 2 on the channel, because right now I'm working from a PlayStation. We're going to try and get a gaming PC at some point. I do have a Steam Deck, so my Steam library is already starting to build, and I'd love to eventually play Dead Space. But if it could have a console release, that would be great. It'd be great to have a nice polished console release too, because I like to collect physical media still, and that'd be cool. But that's going to do it. Just a quick video on Dead Space. Gonna have some more Resident Evil today. So I will see you guys there. Bye-bye.